Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. And I'm really excited to be with you all here today. It's very humbling to be asked to talk at a Stories of Success workshop. I don't know, it's a little awkward for me, so just putting that out there. I did want to say I have a note on the right-hand side here for no photos, and that's specifically because I'm going to show you a photo of my family. And you can take photos of the rest of it, but the photo of my family, I try not to share my kids on the internet frequently. So if you could not take a photo of that slide specifically, and I'll remind you when it's coming up. Okay, Meandering Paths Across the Academic Landscape is the title that I gave this talk, and the brief outline that I wanted to cover is a little bit about the story of how I got here, and it was a very meandering path. I was also asked to provide any advice if I had some. I'm going to mention a few pieces of very common and definitely still true pieces of advice, and then I wanted to share a few less common pieces of advice that I think are important and have helped me, I think, through this path. Okay, so a bit about my story. I'll go through from childhood to a faculty position. And so in childhood, I grew up in a large family. My parents had 11 kids. I am a twin, and we are the oldest, and the youngest is 18. We were all homeschooled, so from kindergarten through 12th grade, and we were given a lot of freedom in our education. So I learned from a very early age to sort of direct my interests wherever they wanted to go and follow that. And I think actually a lot of my current love for research was instilled in me when I was a very small child, being given that freedom to direct what I wanted to learn about. Second sort of important piece of information is that my father's an orthopedic surgeon, and he would often come home in the evenings and bring a video of a new surgery that he had to learn. And so that's the picture of the bone there. And he would show it, he would watch it, and we would sit next to him. And in hindsight, I feel like that's kind of gory and weird, but it gave me a very real and thorough appreciation of the beauties of the human body and the amazing capabilities of medicine. And so I think that has actually influenced where I went from there. In high school, I became extremely committed to piano performance. I was very interested in following through on a career in classical music. So academia was nowhere near what I was imagining that I would do. My vision for myself was that I would become a classical pianist, and that's what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, at the end of high school, I was practicing for a big performance and was practicing about 11 hours a day for a long period of time. Because I was homeschooled, I could do that. But what that means when you do that to a body is that you can break down your body. So I ended up getting stress fractures in both of my arms, and the hand surgeon told me that I needed to take a year off from playing. And it sort of dashed my hopes for becoming a classical pianist. So I thought, well, what else can I do? My father suggested that I go to nursing school because he's a physician, and so he thought, maybe medicine would work. So that was the beginning of college, was in a nursing school. I spent a year and a half there. I really loved medicine. I think that is still something that I'm quite passionate about, but I realized quite early on that I'm not gifted in being a nurse. And I was actually pulled aside, speaking of failures, I was pulled aside about a year in by my academic advisor and she said, "Why are you here? You clearly don't like this. This is not for you." So while I could do all the classes, the actual care of the patients was something that was really not something I was gifted at all in. And I respect people who can do that because it takes a very special kind of person. But I failed at being a nurse. So I left. I left the nursing school, and I'm not usually a quitter, and this is something that I still feel as one of the pieces of my life that I know it was the right thing to do, but I quit, and I felt really bad about it. But then I turned around and applied to school in physics, and I did an undergraduate degree in physics at Penn State University. During that time, one of my best friends attempted to commit suicide, and I became they were not successful, thankfully, and they're fine now. But I became very interested in the question of how someone how depression works and how somebody is induced to take some actions like that. And I was curious, here I was in my path of physics and mathematics, which is so clean and so perfect and so beautiful, and then there's this messy thing about life and about what happens to us as humans. And so I was really, at the end of college, I was wondering whether it was possible for me to combine my interests in my love for mathematics and physics with my interest in helping someone who has a mental health disorder. So I ended college, and many of my friends went on to get real jobs and make a lot of money very quickly, and I decided that I didn't really want a real job, and I really wanted to keep learning, and I wanted specifically to learn about whether there was a place for an intersection between physics and mathematics and neuroscience and the understanding of mental health disorders. I was asked during that period of time when I was interviewing for graduate schools whether I was really committed to addressing this wide range of problems or whether I could sort of narrow down my focus. And to give a little backdrop to that point, as an undergraduate, I majored in physics but minored in mathematics, and I did my honors in physical chemistry, and I did my summer research in Japanese literature. So to a graduate school interviewee, they thought, where is this person coming from? What are they doing? And so they said, if you're going to go to graduate school, you're going to have to focus. I don't know if I really focus even now, but that's that. Okay, so I started graduate school. I was really, like I said, interested in this combination of fields, and so I was very lucky to get into a program that allowed me to have multiple advisors. So I had an advisor in physics at the Cavendish at the University of Cambridge. I had an advisor who had a background in mathematics and genetics, and then two in psychiatry. So it was the perfect combination of expertise for what I wanted to do. It is challenging to do interdisciplinary work, and specifically to do it well. And having 4 different advisors can be difficult because they can each be pulling you in very different directions. But I think I'm very grateful for that experience because while it was challenging, it allowed me to think carefully for many years about what are the important and useful ways of integrating these fields. So I see this as a point where I began to think about combining the biology of the mind and the mathematics of the mind. At the end of graduate school, I'll be completely honest that I felt a little tired. Graduate school is hard. It's hard for everybody. And at the end of graduate school, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go on to a postdoc or if I wanted to go get a position in industry somewhere. And so I applied to several different options. I only got postdoc interviews. I didn't get interviews for industry positions. So I did a postdoc. All right, so in the postdoc, not listening to that wonderful interviewer who told me to focus, I decided actually to expand into materials physics, and so that's the illustration on the top right. And the reason is that I was feeling that the work in neuroscience and in understanding mental health is so hard and so complicated and so messy, and I missed the beautiful simplicity of physical systems, non-biological systems. And so actually I've been using these side efforts in materials physics to sort of complement and keep me sane while I think about the other problems in mental health. Okay, and at the end of the postdoc, I had so many ideas. It was no longer a question then about what I would do. I had so many ideas, and I didn't have enough time to do them all, so I knew I wanted to progress towards a faculty position, so I applied for that. I'm now at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been there since 2013, and I see myself as sort of tackling problems at the intersection between these 3 fields: philosophy of mind, biology of mind, and mathematics of mind. Okay, so that's enough about me, except for my strangities. I wanted to share some strangities, and maybe they're commonalities. Maybe a lot of you have these as well. I find it very hard to give up on things, except for quitting nursing school. Most of the time, I really feel like I can't not finish everything. I also love giving myself completely unreasonable, optimistic goals. and then seeing how close I can get to reaching them. And this is actually relevant to what Melanie was saying earlier, is prizing or emphasizing the effort rather than what happened. I love the process of being challenged. I love challenging myself. And that, I think I get a larger dopamine release from challenging myself than from actually meeting the goal that I set, which maybe is kind of strange, but that is the truth. I make deals with myself all the time. So when I'm sitting writing a paper, for example, and I really want a cup of coffee, I say, Danny, you're not allowed to have a cup of coffee until you finish writing the introduction. Or you're not allowed to get lunch until you finish this grant, or etc. I do this all the time. I admit it's maybe strange. And I also think that no period of time is too small to use. And there are several people in my life who think that's bananas. But there it is. All right, so now a few common and true pieces of advice, and then a few maybe uncommon. So the true pieces of advice are definitely, for everyone here, success in science does depend on publications. And I think we can't really skirt around the bush on that. It matters both where you publish and how many papers you publish. It matters if you have a nice portfolio of empirical papers or methods papers, review papers, book chapters. It all matters. The rest, I think, is at least from the outside, is icing. It's not icing in terms of what we value, but it is icing in terms of getting the jobs. I put a couple different colors of icing here. So for purple icing, I think the biggest thing that I look for in CVs is science outreach to the public, to kids, to peers, and particularly emphasis on supporting diversity, I look for. The green icing is conference presentations and posters, and I was going to go for orange icing, but it sounded really gross, so I went for salmon icing, which obviously sounds even worse. But code repositories and sharing data is also something that I think is extremely important. I will say that this might seem really obvious to you, but there are many people for whom it's not obvious. So I want to make it clear that in the success of science, you can still have a family. Partners are special, and kids are awesome. Not that everybody has to have a family, but for those who want it, I want to emphasize that that's still possible. And here's the slide, which please don't take a picture of, or my kids will hate me. This is my husband, Lee Bassett, and my two kids, Silas and Simeon. Lee and I met as undergraduates in an 8 a.m. electricity and magnetism class at Penn State University, which is obviously where love happens. And we have been together ever since. He's a professor in electrical and systems engineering at Penn as well, and so we get to share a lot of the successes and a lot of the failures together with one another. We both understand each other very well in that sense. I did want to say that a lot of people, when they talk about work-life balance, which is often a question that comes up when we talk about success in science, I think there's a common feeling or understanding that work-life balance means that you leave work at work and you leave home at home. And I have to be completely honest and say that I find that impossible. I find that my heart has science in it. My heart has my kids in it too. When I go home at the end of the day, it's not like I can take out the piece of the part that's science. It doesn't work. So we talk about science over the dinner table with my kids. I tell them about what I'm working on. I tell them about something interesting I read in another person's paper. They engage with it just as much, coming back with questions and want me to come talk at their school about neuroscience. And so I feel like it's important for us to understand that passion can be something that we share with our family, and that isn't necessarily something that we just keep at work. I will also, the little archive link at the very top is another indication of the fact that these things actually come together and are not completely separate. So Lee and I, my husband and I, talk a lot about science together, and we actually finally wrote a paper together on quantum networks. He does quantum information science, and I do a lot of network science, and so we actually wrote a paper on quantum networks. I sort of like to lovingly call it our third baby, because it took a lot of effort. Okay. Now, the last little bit that I wanted to share with you is less common, but also true pieces of advice. This book is most people I know haven't read this yet, so I'm assuming many of you haven't either, so I really wanted to show this to you. It's called The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge by Abraham Flexner. And the background of this book is that it's written specifically at a time in history in which a lot of the funding was being channeled specifically to projects that could show immediate relevance to society. And so there was an emphasis on useful scientific investigations and the development of useful knowledge. But Flexner sort of was trying to combat that overall emphasis and say, honestly, you need to allow scientists complete blanket reign of their curiosity to follow what they find most interesting. And many times the most useful advances in science and technology have come from relatively random curiosities or from a project that was actually meant to identify something over here and ended up being useful over here. And so it's really in praise of pure curiosity, whether or not the question that you're asking has any immediate use. And from this book, I highly recommend reading the whole thing. It's very short. There are 4 pieces of advice that I think are useful and I wanted to share. The first one, I think, that helps drive success mostly is your happiness. And I think it's important to remember why you first fell in love with science. And this passage from the book, he says, "Now I sometimes wonder whether our conception of what is useful may not have become too narrow to be adequate to the roaming and capricious possibilities of the human spirit." And I think this is important just to remember what it is that you found amazing about science when you started was not necessarily its utility, but just that it was beautiful. Secondly, I think it's important to remember when you feel a little bit down that many people are forbidden to do the things that you are able to do with complete freedom. And this is particularly for people who are minorities, either gender minorities or racial minorities. There are some people in some countries here in the United States as well as in other countries who are forbidden to do the things that we all have complete freedom to do. The passage that is useful, I think, from Flexner is, "The real enemy of the human race is not the fearless and irresponsible thinker, be he right or wrong. The real enemy is the man who tries to mold the human spirit so that it will not dare to spread its wings." And I think something that helps me move forward is remembering that this opportunity that we have in front of us to be scientists is just incredible, and it's important to remember that. Number 3, remember that your work builds on prior work. I think that a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves because they think that they have to completely change what science is. And I think it's important to realize that all of our contributions build on a long-standing history. So the passage from Flexner is, "Almost every discovery has a long and precarious history. Someone finds a bit here and then another bit there. A third step succeeds later, and thus onwards till a genius pieces the bits together and makes the decisive contribution. Science, like the Mississippi, begins in a tiny rivulet in the distant forest. Gradually, other streams swell its volume, and the roaring river that bursts the dikes is formed from countless sources." This is the science that we do, and I think that presence and that dependence on history is something that's beautiful and encouraging about what we do. And then finally, I think it's really extremely important to remember that each of us has different interests, and that we need diverse approaches and diverse interests and diverse thoughts on the same problem in order for science to progress. And the passage from Flexner is, he says, "I am not for a moment suggesting that everything that goes on in laboratories will ultimately turn to some unexpected practical use, or that an ultimate practical use is its actual justification. Much more am I pleading for the abolition of the word use and for the freeing of the human spirit. To be sure, we shall thus free some harmless cranks. To be sure, we shall waste some precious dollars. But what is infinitely more important is that we shall be striking the shackles off the human mind and setting it free for the adventures which in our own day have, on the one hand, taken Halley and Rutherford and Einstein and their peers millions upon millions of miles into the uttermost realms of space, and on the other loosed the boundless energy imprisoned in the atom. But these ultimate and unforeseen and unpredictable practical results are not offered as a justification. These great artists, for such are scientists, disseminate the spirit which prevailed in laboratories in which they were simply following the line of their own natural curiosity. And I would encourage us all to allow everyone else around us to have their own natural curiosity, to tackle the questions that they are interested in the way that they are interested in tackling them. So just to summarize, I think that it's important to remember why you first fell in love with science and to allow that passion to remain strong. To remember that many people are forbidden to do the things that you have complete freedom to do, and that instills some amount of gratitude. Number 3, to remember that your work builds on prior work, which engenders some amount of humility. And then number 4 is to remember that each of us has different interests. And I think what we really need today is champions of diversity in who we are, but also in how we think. And I think that that's incredibly important as we move into the next decade. So with that, thank you.